You're gonna do it. Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on the Film, and I'm very, very excited that we're presenting our first Halloween LGBT horror shorts. And we have 7 really great films. And we also have 2 programs of talkbacks with some of the directors of these films. I'm very, very excited about tonight's talkbacks. I'm gonna have everybody introduce themselves, and then we're gonna talk about their films, horror, and a bunch of fun stuff. So I'll start with Bears Rebecca. Do you want to tell us about yourself and your film?
Sure. My name is Bears Rebecca Fonte. I'm the writer, director, and costumer of Conversion Therapist, which is a hyper-violent LGBTQ horror film about revenge. I live in Austin, Texas, and yeah, I don't know. What else do you want to hear about me?
That's
I'm
it.
a
For now. We'll go around and then we'll just.
Okay, good. I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Richard.
Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Knight Jr. I'm the writer-director of Blame It on Toby, which is intended to be the pilot episode of a psychological horror anthology series called Rogues Gallery. It's inspired by what would be called old school psychological horror shows like Night Gallery, Boris Karloff's Thriller, Tales from the Crypt, that kind of thing. So thrilled to talk, and it has some pretty major LGBTQ characters. So happy about that.
All right. And Maggie.
Yeah, I'm Maggie Berger. Also M Berger is how I've been signing my stories in my films. And I'm a writer, filmmaker based in Austin. And my movie is Cleanse, which is about an energy healer that essentially has to perform an exorcism. But yeah, I mostly write in magical realism that also obviously there's crossover in horror, but I'm excited to be here. This is fun. This is so exciting. I'm glad to do, this is my first Halloween screening, so this is great.
I'm so glad y'all are here. So I'm gonna ask each of you how long it took for each of you to make your films and what kind of research, if any, you had to do. Maggie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, let's see. I wrote the film in 2017 and finished it last year. I think that because this was my first narrative short, I'd done documentary before. It just took a little bit longer for me to kind of get the flow of things. That, of course, plus money. I got a better paying job halfway through that time, and so I was able to put more money into the film. But I would say probably 3 years total to finish it. And I did do a ton of research. I actually have a really good friend of mine who is a pranic healer and an energy healer. And he was so nice to allow me to go to their different events for a while. So for about a month, I went to a bunch of energy healing events and just talked to people and kind of wanted to understand their experience, because I think the goal of the film wasn't to discuss whether or not the main character was crazy or whether she was wrong. It was just simply to explore her experience. And so I wanted to make sure I got it right. And later I shared the film with a few of those people, and they were like, oh, wow, what an interesting thing to see this thing that I see every day in a film. And I was like, I'm glad I got it semi-right, at least.
Great, thanks. Richard.
Well, first, I'm in Chicago. Should have mentioned that, forgot. I wrote the original draft of Toby in 2012 when I was on a cruise with my husband, thinking that some friends and I were thinking about trying to put together, again, like a modern day version of Night Gallery. And the inspiration for it was, again, I was at dinner with my husband in this very fancy restaurant when we were originally dating, and we looked across, and there it was a private dining room of the opera company here in Chicago. And there was this man with all these teddy bears sitting kind of lined up to him. And they were coming up and talking to the man, and he would turn and address the teddy bears. And so, of course, we asked, yeah, what's the deal with the guy over there? Well, he was one of their biggest, a lot of their money came from this person. And so they just kind of looked the other way. And I started to think about, and now we have like the supreme example of this, the rich are different than us. They get treated differently. And so that was the inspiration for the character of Arthur, who goes everywhere with this doll and has since the childhood. So I did a lot of research into kind of WASP culture and then how a person like that grows up. And really what was best for me is then I wrote a really detailed fake Wikipedia entry about Arthur Wilcox Prentice VI.
Mhm.
So I knew all this stuff about the character, which really informed a lot of the writing.
Okay.
And a lot of this kind of happened. We tried to raise money, didn't happen. Then several years later, I met our executive producer, Patrick Schaller, who within probably a month said, okay, get ready to be like so green, said, I'm going to fund the whole thing. Let's do this. So at that point, things moved very quickly.
Okay.
I would say within 6 months to a year. Well, that doesn't sound so quick, but then we shot it. So.
Okay. And Bears Rebecca.
So I started writing Conversion Therapist as a completely different film. It was called The Babysitter at the time, and I think I started in 2016, and it was really just an attempt to write torture porn, which I didn't like. And I gave myself a challenge of trying to write a character who was the violent actor in the torture porn, and see if I could find a way that you would like that person. And I kept writing it, and I kept getting feedback from people who were like, well, she's interesting, but I just don't know why I like her. And I was like, yeah, because she's cool. And the thing that happens with me is like, so every film I have ever written, I've written for the same lead actress. So I know exactly what she can do. I know, and I also try to push her to do different things. So I knew that she would be really good in this role. And I also knew that I always put a lot of myself into her. And it's honestly, this is like, as I was writing this film, it was the same time you asked about research. The research I was doing at the time was research on myself. So I didn't have to learn anything, but I had to really start dealing with some things that I had not really addressed for 30 years. And, you know, I wrote the script and I started writing the script. I was like, well, the big event that happened was the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. And I woke up the next morning and I was just decimated by that. And I couldn't think, I couldn't do anything. I was at a festival and I was supposed to be hosting like jurors, and I just couldn't do anything. And I was talking to my wife and I was like, I just don't understand, you know, I'm so taken with this. And, you know, it felt weird because at the time, the LGBTQ community was not my community. But it really was. I just hadn't really dealt with that forever. So I decided, well, you know who I really want to kill? I really want to kill conversion therapists, because at the time, after the Orlando shooting, there were these people who were like, well, they got what was coming to them. And, you know, I really think it's God's punishment. And I was like, these are the people who need to be shot. These are the people who need to be tortured and terrified. So I rewrote the script from that perspective, which did change everything, because now the character was sort of likable in her righteous indignation. And then when I made it a love story where she was actually protecting somebody who had gone through a transition at a young age and had been told that there was something wrong with her, which was kind of a personal experience, that was when I realized, okay, so if I make this film, I have to come out, which was a big deal because I didn't know if I was ever going to do that. But I believe that if you're going to tour a film like this, it has to be honest, and you have to like go and have conversations about why you made it. And it would not be legitimate if I was a cisgender heteronormative white guy taking this film. It wouldn't make any sense. So yeah, the research was really research on myself. I came out the day that I released my Kickstarter to the world. Although I'd come out to my team when we were filming, because I had filmed the Kickstarter while we were filming. So they all knew. But yeah, when I did the Kickstarter, it's basically when I announced to the world, like, guess what? I'm trans. Give me money. So it's, you know, good advertising.
Congratulations to all three of you. I'll start with Richard. What do you think is the key to a successful scary movie?
To unnerve people and scare them. And there are, of course, very different levels of that. either, something that jump scares that happen like, right then, or things that stay with you. And then there are all these different complexities that happen in between that. I mean, I came from a different background. I was a film critic for a very long time and a film writer. I covered LGBT cinema for a paper here for a really long time. And I was just recently talking with a couple of people about the differences between the two Suspiria movies. And the original is kind of sort of slasher, kind of, gelato, or not gelato, what do they call it? Giallo stuff. Yeah. And then this more recent is much more, not scary, sort of, but it sort of is super creepy. And I think there's room for all of that stuff. I like that a lot of the new things, like The Witch, like Hereditary, like Midsommar, those are much more psychological, scary. But I also think that there's absolutely a place for, I watched Alice Sweet Alice last night, come on, from the 70s. There's totally room for all of it. I just love all of it. And I love that there's so much more queer horror, and there needs to be a ton more. I'm just going to give a shout out to Hellbent from 2004, which was one of the very first, gay slasher movies. So I love that filmmakers like Bears and Maggie, that you're doing this, because it just makes me really happy.
Oh, great. Bears, Rebecca, your answer.
I think you really want to bring the audience into the picture to feel like they're there. And that can be done a couple different ways. It can either be that they identify with the person being terrified, or if they identify with the killer, which is what I was doing. But also you're able to make them feel present if you can just really wrap them in sound and picture such that it's so real. That's why I think you see in a lot of good horror movies, you see really close shots, things that feel very tactile. You see sweat on people's cheeks and things like that. Like, the closer you can get into a story, the more the audience is, you want them to lean in so that then you can slap them.
Maggie.
I would say, at least for me, I think that just making it relatable and making the characters like fully rounded and grounded in reality, because I think we've definitely all have had the experience of watching a film where the character dies and we all go, well, I didn't really care if he lived, so it doesn't really matter that he's dead now. So at least for me, I spend a lot of time working on my characters, and I spend a lot of time saying my dialogue out loud and doing kind of, pre-reads and having a lot of like table reads, and really just making sure that everything sounds really nice and the dialogue sounds like a real person. And I do a lot of work, at least with Cleanse, I did a lot of work with the actors. We did a lot of like meditation exercises and a lot of like brainstorming about our characters, and I let them write a lot of their backstory. And so I think that really lent itself to making the film feel more like a documentary, where you're watching this thing kind of happen, rather than being so cinematic that I'm kind of like, choosing pretty over the fullness of the characters, which I think that happens a lot in horror too, is that you can tell they spent $5,000 on special effects, but maybe didn't pay their actors. But yeah, so definitely the characters.
Okay. When I was a teenager, I grew up on John Carpenter's Halloween, and I watched it over and over. And I guess I thought I was the only gay person who loved horror films. And as I've grown older, I realized that's not true. But why do you think that the LGBT community embraces horror films so much? I'll start with Bears, Rebecca.
I think horror films are always about outsiders.
Yeah.
And I think, we all have a tendency to view ourselves as outsiders. And so I think there's an identification to that. But there's also sort of a destruction of modern society, or like passable society, like in horror films. It's like, so I feel like it's a little transgressive, you know, and as somebody who's queer, I think we like to see good people get it, because, you know, we don't get to see that in real life.
Okay. Maggie.
For me at least, I don't know that I could speak to everyone, but I can speak to why I really enjoy horror. And I think that for me, it's about that adrenaline rush and that first, I think everybody remembers the first time you were basically like, can I cuss?
Oh, please cuss.
I was gonna say, I think everybody remembers the first time that you were scared shitless and you couldn't sleep for a week and you didn't want to cover. I think that we're all just kind of secretly chasing that high. But specifically in the queer community, at least for me, it's about being able to have that fear feeling in a controlled place that I can kind of like turn it off if I need to, because I think that unfortunately the world doesn't always want you to even be alive. And so you sometimes see things out in the world outside of your control, but this is something that you can do within your control. It's just fun. And also obviously, like I said, we're all, I think, just chasing that first real scare. Hopefully we all find it again.
And Richard.
I would agree with both of you that the outsider thing is really, you know, when you think about Carrie, and I'm old enough to remember, you know, seeing that in the theater. What I also didn't mention and should have is music is like super important to me, and especially in the horror genre. And when you think about the score for Halloween, that theme that sets you off, Bernard Herrmann, which completely transformed the shower sequence. It's iconic. He did the same thing for Brian De Palma's Sisters, insisted that there was going to be this credit sequence and nothing happens for a while, but you're in such dread. And so this idea of the outsider, I mean, Carrie is like, you can just, there are so, I mean, you know, in The Haunting, the Julie Harris character, Eleanor, there again and again and again, it is the outsider, the outsider, the outsider. And there's also the idea, as you said, Maggie, of this going into the dark and facing years, and you make it through. I mean, the first screening, preview screening of Silence of the Lambs, nobody knew what we were going to see. I mean, can you imagine? And that guy keeps saying, okay, as they're going down floor after floor after floor, okay, do not talk to him, do not do this. Da, 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 da. By the time you see Hannibal Lecter just standing there, right? And that whole thing with whatever is it, Buffalo Bill in the basement. I mean, that audience. So I agree with both of you.
That is such a great point, Richard, because I remember seeing, I just don't remember this. Do you all remember the movie The Descent, The Women in the Cave?
Yeah.
That was,
Sure.
I didn't know it was a thriller. So I saw this movie with a bunch of critics and none of us knew anything about it. We were like, what the fuck is this? That was an incredibly intense movie, and it still is an intense movie. But yeah, I mean, you're completely right about expectations not knowing. I started doing Out on Film 12 years ago. And at the time, we might have gotten one or two horror films in a year. So it's been really, really nice for me to see the progression. I mean, we started doing our horror night 3 years ago, where we do 2 horror films and a horror shorts package. And now we're doing our first Halloween shorts package. So thank you all for helping us make that happen. But why do you think that there's so many filmmakers right now who are willing to tell these stories and embrace this genre? I'll start with Maggie.
Well, I think that whenever, and I'm sure that I feel like I've heard this answer so many times, but I really do think it's true. I think that we are all like processing the horror of our lives right now. I think that having like a president that doesn't believe in obviously doesn't believe in anything coming, and I think that the way in which people process sometimes is through horror, and maybe they didn't have the opportunity to do that processing before they got locked in their houses for 3 months. But I think that that's starting to happen, and that kind of processing is starting to come out. And sometimes you kind of want to create a character and put them through something worse than what you're going through in order to kind of like get through those hard traumatic moments. And I think that the past 4 years have been really hard and traumatic, especially for marginalized communities, which includes the LGBTQIA community. So at least on my end, I know that I've been creating a lot more intense work and a lot more serious work. There was a period of time where I wrote kind of horror comedy, and coming out in 2016, and I don't know where it went. Hopefully it comes back, but we'll see.
It doesn't seem like a time to write comedy right now. I got to say, it just doesn't feel right.
Oh, I don't know. I wrote a big old gay Get Out kind of Knives Out called Haunted Homicide, with a drag queen detective that's making the script rounds and is doing pretty well.
Nice.
In some ways, yes, it's a time that, you know, you might need to laugh and forget. My husband and I just watched Young Frankenstein for about the 12th time, or, you know, Clue. We just finished Murder by Death. I mean, I think part of this also is that horror, listen, we're in a business, and people are much more ready to fund a horror film because they make money. They get picked up for distribution. And now they have figured out that African-American horror, there's a huge audience for that. There's a huge audience for queer horror stuff. Hello, who's been saying this for years and years and years? So the money people have started to figure it out. I think that's part of it.
Okay. Okay.
I don't really have anything to add. I agree with all that. I mean, I think it's economics. I know from my own personal, like the first horror film I wrote very specifically to be like, I'm going to write something that's going to get into 75 film festivals. And I did, and it did. So, and I was like, I guess this works. So that's what I've been doing.
Good. What would you, are there any particular horror films that you remember growing up that really rattled you or just sort of made a mark? I'll start with Richard.
Oh, The Haunting.
The Haunting.
Robert Wise film from 1963 with Julie Harris and Clara Bloom, and it's based on the classic Shirley Jackson novel, which she's my all-time favorite writer. There's definitely a queer sensibility. It's been remade it was remade as not a very good film in my opinion, and then a television series was based on it. It's psychological horror. You really don't see anything. It was absolutely terrifying, and I remember that as kind of a seminal experience. Some of the De Palma films, as I mentioned, Carrie was one that was, you know, as a young queer boy, to see that, and there was nothing in it that was, you know, it was just that she was this outsider. Many of us, when we saw Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which is like the gay, you know, Freddy movie, we knew, okay, it's a gay horror film. I think there are a lot of these out there where there are queer characters, but they're just not so identified.
Sure.
Kind of. So yeah, I would. The Haunting's probably the first one. The other one would be The Innocents from 1961, the Jack Clayton film based on Turn of the Screw with Deborah Carr, about the children that are haunted. And if you start to go into the history of these films, there are actors that are you know, that are queer that played the roles. There's always like something underneath in a lot of movies that even to this day, The Red Shoes, I'm sorry, Boris Lermontov is gay. You know, just to go to another genre.
Okay. There's Rebecca.
It's all there. We've been there all along.
I'm sorry.
I think in high school, the films I saw that really shook me to my bones were the ones that were a lot more based on religion or cults and that sort of thing, because I think people are far more frightening than than monsters and killers. So like I remember, and also the potential of there being true evil. Like at the time I grew up in a very religious family. And so there was very much a, devil like is looking over your shoulder, sinner kind of attitude to anything I did. So films like The Omen and The Exorcist, I found to be really, really terrifying, even though there's not a lot of kills like in a movie like that, right? So it's more about the general feeling. And then a film like Rosemary's Baby, where it's more about the way people get together and they control everything. To me, those are the most frightening because I think people are the worst.
Okay. Maggie?
Yeah, I do not look it, but I am half Mexican. And so I grew up in a very Catholic household. And so similar to Bears, I saw The Exorcist, the director's cut of The Exorcist, way too young. And I remember pulling it out of a bin and telling my mom, it's from the 70s. It can't be that scary. Like, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And she had let me see a couple horror movies before then, like Halloween, and I had laughed during those. So she was like, oh, she'll be fine. And it was not fine. So definitely those kinds of movies scarred me, but also I would say like my generation all talk about The Ring. And that kind of hit at the perfect moment when I was, I think, 13. And it was when I was able to, I think it was the first time I was able to really watch horror movies. And I wasn't in the place where I was picking apart horror movies yet. And so I just remember staying up for 7 days straight, just completely and totally terrified that this was it and I was going to get my phone call. And yeah, I think that's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. That's kind of the high that I've been chasing since. But nowadays, I would say like definitely Hereditary kind of shook me to the core, and Ari Aster's stuff has been really exciting to see. But yeah, definitely. I don't know that tone. I don't know if any of those are connected, but they feel connected in my brain.
How old were you when you saw The Exorcist?
I think I was 11 or 12. It was around the
Oh
same
my
time.
God, child services. Come
No,
get
it's
your mother.
exactly the same age I was when I was thinking about it.
Oh, that's
And then when I was
terrible.
15, I showed it to my sister who was 10, and then I got grounded.
To pass on the trauma. Yeah. And what was even worse was it was the director's cut. So it was the fuck me Jesus cut. And I remember
And the spider web, right? Is in that
and
too.
the stairs, and she descends
Oh,
the stairs.
wow.
And I was just like, I remember watching it. My parents had gone to bed because my dad doesn't really like horror, and my mother is terrified and watches most movies if they have any suspense through her fingers. And so they were like, okay, we're gonna go. Are you gonna be okay? And I was like, yeah. Like, go to bed. And I remember just laying in bed that night up until 3, 4 in the morning, just like, well, I guess I'm going to get possessed now because I saw that movie.
Man.
It's just terrible. Have any of you seen, we talked about this in volume 1, but have any of you seen Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black?
Are you,
Really?
hello? Yes, hello.
Oh my God, that is, I mean,
Grandpa, great grandpa here has seen this, yes.
the first two were good, but the third one, Jesus.
My husband is a gigantic Dark Shadows. The Zuni fetish doll.
Yeah.
I want to say that the Zuni fetish doll might be up for auction right now. There's a huge auction of Hollywood memorabilia that's for sale. I mean, obviously, with what I made, I'm fascinated by evil dolls and all that kind of stuff. And that was made for TV.
I know. I mean, TV, you don't think something that's scary. Yeah. Maggie, Bears, if you've not seen Trilogy of Terror, I highly recommend it. I mean, it's got Karen Black in all 3 episodes, but the last one is just like, it is extremely intense. So that's my recommendation. I've got one more question for all of you. All of your films are so very well made, and all of them have rich characters in them as well. But how do all 3 of you go about really, dealing with, you're all dealing with LGBT characters. How do you go about dealing with representation and making sure that these characters are so well-rounded? I'll start with Richard.
Well, I'm a gay man, so you kind of write what you know, and or start from there, because I also am from the point of, this is not a document, this is fiction, so I get to make up whatever I want.
Mhm.
And I guess because it's inherent in who I am. Actually, the first version of Toby, that couple was a straight couple.
Okay.
And at a certain point, my executive producer said, what if they were a gay couple? And it was like, ding, ding, ding. Wow. They had a lot of, and at the same time, it would be kind of the same. They're just a gay couple, and one of them really wants to succeed in life and what doesn't really heed the warning signs. The other one is more cautious. I mean, I don't know. How do you make sure? I don't know. Maybe you have other people read your stuff, you read it aloud, or somebody says to you, what if these two people sound a little bit alike? I mean, I think we all kind of have our creative mentors that you trust. Don't you both have people that, okay, I need you to read this and really, be honest. I don't want to hear any bullshit. I just want to hear, the B story is not working, or there's way too much dialogue. See, that's my problem, as you can tell. Shut up, and we can do the same thing by showing the phone, right? So that's a very long answer to just say, I think you start from what you know. And for me, I'm a 100-year-old gay man, and that's where I have all this history in my head that starts from there. And it's just natural. It's natural in my world to have queer people everywhere in my invented world.
Okay.
Okay, I'm shutting up.
No, that was great. I mean, Maggie.
I will say presentation for me was a pretty big deal in the pre-production. We talked about it a lot, especially since the main character in my film is a middle-aged Black woman, and I'm not a middle-aged Black woman. And so we did a lot of work with the character, that main actress, Simone Murray, who's now based in Atlanta, who is phenomenal and amazing to work with. We did a lot of work together where I kind of would ask her things like, well, what would you do in this situation? What would you do in this situation? And she had a lot of great answers, and she was open to really collaborating with me. And so we did a lot of collaboration. And in terms of the lesbian couple in the film, they were based off of an abusive relationship that I was in. And so with a woman. So it didn't really make sense for me to make the relationship between a man and a woman. Why would it be between a man and a woman if it was based on a relationship between a woman and a woman? And I also really wanted to make sure that the film was inclusive of people of color and, of course, queer people, but also wasn't about their queerness or wasn't about the fact that they were people of color, because that's not what the film was about. And I think that I had a ton of different readers in the script phase. That definitely was super helpful. I made sure to get a really, really diverse group of readers and people that I trusted, who I knew would actually tell me, no, this doesn't look good, or really think about changing this. And I got feedback. I think that if you do the work up front and you make sure to hire a really diverse crew and have a really diverse cast and really have that like open vulnerability, transparency on set, I think you're setting yourself up for success. I think where people end up going wrong, at least from what I've seen, is that you'll have, the straight white male director directing horror, and he has a vision for everything, and he kind of sets a tone on set that this isn't a creative space for everybody to be included in their opinion. Instead, this is just for his vision. And I think that sometimes when folks get stuck in an echo chamber, that's when we get in trouble. And so I think that it's really about setting yourself up for success in the beginning by making sure that you have diversity front and behind the camera, and also making sure that you have diversity in your readers.
Okay. And Bears Rebecca.
And so I would say that the four actors in the film are all pretty much three of them, the polyamorous trio, are all me. So that's how I knew that they were right. It's the part of me that was hurt, the part of me that would have done anything to, like, I guess it was the part of me that hadn't come out yet before, that was like, I'll do anything I want to be a good ally and I just want to help. And then the part of me that is like the newly queer, that is like, fuck all you all, I'm taking revenge, right? And so they were all three facets of my personality. And then the preacher is, my father, really. I didn't realize it when I wrote it, that was true. But the more I reread it, I do think it is based on a combination of my father and probably the deacon at my church, from growing up. So it was people I knew really, really well. In terms of making sure things were right, I mean, like I said, I have my lead actress who I write everything for. So she reads everything I write. She's can be very honest with me. And I'm talking about, like, I'm going back to like 2006, she's read everything I've written. So, and then before we filmed, before I was sure I was going to come out, I knew that if I was going to have a transgender character in the film, I had to have a transgender actress. That was 100% the rule. And so that took an extra 5 months in pre-production to find the right one, because I had a pretty particular vision I was going for. And there's just not as many actors out there, it's just, I mean, I posted so many casting calls and I would just get tons of cisgender people saying, well, I really like the opportunity to play trans. And I was like, that's the point that you've just made. You can't play trans. And so that was, and some of them, eventually I got angry at them and I started writing them back. And I said, just so you know, you can't play trans. You will never be able to play trans. Just like you could not play black. It just, you can't play it if you don't understand it. So once I found Evelyn, who plays Selena, the transgender character, we spent several times sessions talking over Skype about the role, and I wanted to make sure she felt comfortable with everything, and what her experience had been transitioning at a young age, because I did not have that experience. And so I wanted to make sure that, and it was funny because we had a conversation and I told her I was non-binary. But I didn't come out to her at the time when I cast her. I didn't come out until we were shooting, but I think she knew. So I asked the right questions. So I guess that was good.
Okay. All righty. There's Rebecca, Richard, Maggie. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. Thank you so much for letting us showcase your films as part of our Halloween LGBT shorts film package. And again, I really, really enjoyed tonight. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the love.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And what's the Karen Black series I need to find?
Trilogy of Terror. Your homework is to watch it this
It's a
weekend.
movie.
Trilogy
Okay.
of Maggie.
Yeah, it's the last story.
Yes.
You'll know it. Happy
Okay.
Halloween.
Hey, we're gonna
Happy Halloween.
1 second. We're gonna